The storm hadn't let up since twilight, sweeping across the city like a tide that refused to recede. Headlights glistened against slick asphalt, every street reflecting the chaos of the downpour. Beneath the pitter-patter of rain and distant horns, a small rust-red hatchback curved cautiously through the maze of downtown. Inside, Mira kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, her fingers numb from the cold seeping through the fabric of her worn gloves. The car's heater had given up earlier that evening, leaving behind a faint clicking noise and occasional sputters of lukewarm air. Her jeans clung to her legs like wet paper, and her backpack, crammed with textbooks, spilled across the passenger seat. She was exhausted. A senior at Eastbridge University, Mira was majoring in urban anthropology, a field that fascinated her but couldn't cover tuition. Between her two campus jobs, weekend tutoring, and rideshare driving on Fridays and Saturdays, she barely slept. But driving meant gas money, groceries, and keeping the electricity on in her tiny basement apartment. It meant survival. She hadn't planned to drive tonight. But a flat tire the day before and an unexpected textbook fee had emptied her already thin account. So, when the sky opened up and the rain came down like silver threads from the heavens, she climbed into her car and turned the rideshare app on anyway. It had been a slow night. A couple of drenched couples from downtown, a tired chef on his way to a late shift. Nothing unusual. She was ready to call it quits when the next ping echoed from her phone, a quiet chime that signaled a new passenger. Round push-pin emoji, pickup, Lavelle Street and 9th. Destination, not listed. She frowned. No destination? That was unusual. Most passengers had it pre-filled. Still, she tapped accept, watching the map redirect her toward the old district on the city's edge. It wasn't far from where she grew up, before everything. The streets grew quieter as she neared the intersection. Trees loomed overhead, their skeletal branches bending in the wind. Streetlights flickered as the rain painted everything in watery gold. Under a worn, blinking lamp, a tall figure stood still, no umbrella, no motion. He wore a long charcoal coat that darkened with the rain, his hands tucked into his pockets. His face was shadowed by the downlight, but his posture was calm. Not lost. Just waiting. Mira slowed, rolling the window down halfway. "Are you Elijah?" she asked, checking the app's note. "Yes," he said, voice low but clear. He opened the back door and climbed in, water trailing behind him like a scent of pine and old wood. He didn't say anything further. She tapped her screen. "Where to?" There was a pause. Then, "Can you take me to Harper's Lane?" "Near the old park. East End." Mira blinked. Harper's Lane? It was a name from another lifetime. A street she hadn't spoken aloud in years. The edge of it touched the neighborhood where she'd spent her earliest childhood, the part she had closed off behind metal doors she rarely opened. "That's about 20 minutes in this weather," she replied, trying to sound indifferent. He nodded slowly. "Take your time. No rush." She began to drive. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but thick, like old linen folded and stored away too long. The only sound was the rhythm of the wipers and the occasional squeak of her damp sneakers shifting against the pedals. Then, after several minutes, he leaned slightly forward. "There used to be a children's home there," he said. "On Harper's. Closed down a long time ago." Mira didn't respond immediately. Her grip on the wheel tightened. Her pulse fluttered against her throat. "I know," she said, voice low. "I lived nearby. Heard stories." He nodded. "I was there until I was 7. Then I got adopted and never went back." Something in his tone, measured, quiet, unfinished, made her chest constrict. "There was a girl," he continued, his voice more distant now. "She used to hum every night. Not loud. Just enough to hear if you were in the bed next to her. Same tune. Every night. I don't remember the words anymore. But I can still hear it sometimes. Like a ghost lullaby." Mira's hands trembled on the wheel. She remembered that song. She remembered the boy who used to trace stars on the ceiling with his finger and promised they'd have their own house one day, with a tire swing and a garden filled with sunflowers. But she didn't speak. Not yet. They turned onto Harper's Lane. The street had changed. Most of the old brick homes were either abandoned or swallowed by ivy and rain. The lot where the children's home once stood was now overgrown, wild grass, a collapsed fence, a half-buried tricycle nearly lost to time. Mira slowed to a stop. The man in the back leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. "It's strange," he said. "Everything's gone. But it still feels familiar. Like the ground remembers." She finally turned, her voice cautious. "Some places never leave you." even when they disappear. He met her gaze in the rearview mirror. Their eyes locked. There was a flicker, just a spark, of recognition. But neither of them said anything. Not yet. They sat in silence for a moment longer. The rain softened to a whisper against the roof. The world outside seemed to hold its breath. He spoke again. "My name's Elijah, by the way. Elijah Brooks." Mira's throat caught. She knew that name. The last time she'd heard it, it had come from the lips of a crying child being pulled away by a woman in a navy coat. The boy who promised to write. The boy who never did. She could have said her name then. Could have whispered it into the stillness. But instead, she simply replied, "Nice to meet you, Elijah." He smiled faintly, and sat back. And the car began to move again. Not toward a destination. But toward something long buried. Something that had waited through the storms of time. To be found again. The rain had slowed to a mist, barely more than a breath against the windows. Mira guided the car gently through the eastern stretch of the city, past closed shops and crumbling brick buildings. Each turn took her deeper into the streets of her childhood, roads paved with both laughter and loneliness. Her heart thudded louder than the windshield wipers. Elijah sat in the back seat, quiet now. But his presence filled the car. Not with weight, but with memory. She remembered the last time she saw him. It was a cloudy Thursday. She had woken up from a nap to find his bunk empty, sheets still warm. No goodbye. No note. Just gone. One day he was there, her closest friend, and the next. Nothing. The nuns had said he'd been adopted. She hadn't understood. She was 8. Mira had waited for him for months after that. Wrote little notes and tucked them behind the old swing set. Sang his favorite song before bed every night, hoping it might travel through the wind and find him. It never did. Until now. She glanced into the rearview mirror. His eyes were cast outside, watching the fog roll over the streetlights. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. How could he? They had both changed so much. But she knew. The way he spoke. The way his voice caught when he talked about the song. It was him. And this wasn't just another ride anymore. A few minutes later, they pulled onto one of the oldest streets in Eastbridge, where sidewalks cracked from tree roots and faded murals peeked through the grime of age. She turned down a narrow lane lined with sycamores, their twisted branches dancing in the breeze. She slowed the car to a stop near a rusted fence, half swallowed by ivy. "This is it?" she asked softly. Elijah leaned forward, eyes fixed on a crooked metal sign hanging loosely on one hinge. It read, Hawthorne House Children's Home, or at least, it used to. Now only fragments of the letters remained. He opened the door without answering, stepping out into the cool night. Mira hesitated, then followed, wrapping her arms around herself as she emerged into the mist. The old playground was still there, if you knew where to look, half hidden by brush and time. The swing set was just metal bones now, one chain still dangling. The merry-go-round was a rusted circle of memory. And the tree. It still stood. Massive, even taller than she remembered, its limbs like open arms. At its base, thick roots curled around broken bricks and scattered gravel. "I thought it would be gone," Elijah murmured. Mira stepped beside him, her boots sinking slightly into the soft mud. "Some things survive," she said. "Even when they're forgotten." He turned to her, puzzled. She didn't flinch. She crouched down and gently brushed away the wet leaves at the foot of the tree, her hands finding the same smooth stone she used to visit as a child. Elijah's eyebrows knit. "Wait. What are you doing?" Mira tapped the stone 3 times, 2 quick, 1 soft. Just like they used to. She lifted it carefully, revealing a shallow hollow between the roots. Nestled inside was a small, battered tin box. The paint had long since faded, but the rusted flower decal was still faintly visible beneath the grime. She lifted it out with trembling hands. "I used to leave notes here," she whispered, not looking at him. "Every week. For a year after you left." Elijah's eyes widened. "How did you know about this spot?" Her hand stilled on the lid. She slowly opened it. Inside were dozens of folded scraps of paper, some yellowed, others damp around the edges, but all intact. Childish writing scrawled across them in different colored inks. Stick figures. Song lyrics. Birthday wishes. One read, "Dearie, I saved you a cookie. It's in the tree. Come soon." Another, "The new kid cries a lot. I miss you more." Elijah took a shaky step back. "You're..." She finally met his gaze. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "Mira. You called me Miri back then." He stared at her, stunned. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "I waited for you," she said, her voice trembling. "I waited every day, even after they told me you weren't coming back." I didn't know," he stammered. "I didn't even remember your name until just now. I thought maybe it was Maddie or Mina." She gave a sad smile. "Close enough." Elijah knelt down beside her, eyes locked on the box. His fingers hovered over one of the notes, but he didn't touch it. Instead, he looked at her, truly looked. "I remembered your song," he said, his voice thick. "Even when I couldn't remember the words. I remembered how you'd sing it when the lights went out. How I wasn't afraid when you did." Tears pricked Mira's eyes. "You said when you got adopted, you'd come back. That we'd build a garden under this tree." He laughed, choked and watery. "That sounds like something a 7-year-old would promise." "But I believed you," she whispered. "So I stayed." The wind rustled through the leaves above them. The tree creaked softly, like it was listening. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said, reaching out slowly, his fingertips brushing hers. "Not once. But every time I thought about coming back, I got scared. What if you hated me? What if you forgot me?" "I never forgot," she said. "You were my best friend." They sat in silence beneath the old oak, side by side, not as strangers anymore, but as children grown up with scars and stories still etched into their hearts. "I can't believe you're here," he whispered. "I can," she replied. "I think the tree always knew you'd come back." He chuckled, eyes shining. "Still believe in magic trees?" "Always." They stayed there for a long time, watching the mist lift. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. Real. Two people who had once been left behind, now finding a piece of themselves they didn't know they'd lost. A few days passed, and the city dried slowly, as if exhaling after a long-held breath. The rain that had once blurred everything gave way to brittle sunshine and chilled air. But something inside Mira had shifted, quietly, firmly. She couldn't stop thinking about that night. About Elijah. About the tree. She found herself walking past the lot again, even when she wasn't working. Once, twice, then nearly every evening after class. The tree stood there each time like a living monument, stoic, watchful, remembering what others had forgotten. And then, on a Wednesday just before dusk, he was there again. Elijah stood near the chain-link fence that surrounded the old playground. He didn't look like the man from the back seat of her car anymore, not the one with the city slick coat and the quiet storm in his eyes. He looked younger. Or maybe just lighter. He had a thermos in his hand and a wool scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. "You come here often?" he asked when she approached. Mira raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerously close to a pickup line." He smiled, genuinely this time, and handed her the thermos. "It's chamomile. I remembered you said caffeine makes your hands shake." She blinked. "You remember that?" He shrugged. "You told me once. During snack time. Right after you traded me your pudding for my graham crackers." She took the thermos slowly, a grin tugging at her lips. "Still the worst trade I ever made." "I disagree." They sat down together on the cracked stone bench near the swing set. Silence settled between them, not dense, not uncertain. Just space. Like the pause between verses of a song you both know by heart. As the days turned to weeks, their meetings continued. They didn't make a big deal of it. No one labeled what it was. Some nights they brought sandwiches. Other times, just old stories. They cleaned the lot, slowly and deliberately, clearing branches, collecting bottle caps and broken glass. Mira brought gloves, Elijah brought tea, and sometimes they'd just sit under the tree until the sun disappeared behind the skyline. Once, Elijah brought a packet of lavender seeds. "For the garden," he said. She smiled at the memory. "You remembered that too? Let's make good on our promise," he replied. And they did. They planted the lavender by the roots of the oak. Mira added wild daisy bulbs, and Elijah came back with basil, just for fun. They called it Home Bloom. Outside the lot, the world spun as usual. Mira still worked her weekend shifts. Still studied until her eyes burned. But now, after the chaos of exams and endless textbooks, there was a small pocket of peace waiting for her. A sanctuary stitched together by shared soil and second chances. She told no one about Elijah. Not yet. Not because she was hiding him, but because what they had was fragile, like a sprout just breaking through frost. Some things needed quiet to grow. And Elijah? He never pressed. Never asked for more than she could give. Instead, he showed up, consistently. Some afternoons, she'd find him waiting at the cafe near campus with 2 steaming cups. Other times, he'd be in the corner booth with a book, pretending to read until she arrived. He listened more than he spoke, And when he did talk, it was never about business or money or the empire he apparently ran. It was about the playground they used to sneak out to. The time he'd scraped his knee falling off the slide and she'd patched him up with toilet paper and tape. The silly song she used to make up about the moon being made of marshmallows. And when she laughed, she felt it, not just in her chest, but in her bones. Like joy was returning to where it once belonged. One evening, while they were repotting a few seedlings under the tree, Mira glanced up. "Why did you really come back to this city?" she asked. Elijah paused, hands dirty with soil. "There was a charity gala. My company partners with local youth organizations. I wasn't supposed to go personally, but at the last minute. I just felt like I had to." "Why?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe part of me knew this place still had unfinished business." She studied him. "And now?" "Now I know it wasn't the place. It was you." Her breath hitched. He didn't rush the moment. He didn't reach for her hand or say anything poetic. He just looked at her, open, honest. And she nodded. Later that week, she brought a box with her to the tree. Inside were the remaining notes she'd written to him all those years ago, the ones too fragile to keep out in the weathered tin. She laid them out on the bench like tiny ghosts made of paper and ink. Elijah read each one. Some made him laugh. Others made him go quiet, his fingers hovering over the words like they might dissolve under his touch. "I don't deserve this," he said at last. Mira tilted her head. "What?" "Your words. Your forgiveness." She considered that for a long time. Then, "It's not about deserving. It's about deciding." He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, he didn't carry the weight of regret in his eyes. Just gratitude. The following Sunday, Elijah surprised her. Not with flowers or jewelry, but with a deed. He had purchased the lot. It was still city-owned, he explained. Technically designated for redevelopment, but no one had touched it in years. "I made a few calls." Mira's mouth fell open. "You bought the lot?" He nodded. "We're not tearing it down. We're building it up. A community garden. Therapy space. A little reading nook. Maybe a mural." She stared at him. "You're serious?" "I want it to be what we always dreamed. A place that doesn't forget the kids who grew up here." A lump formed in her throat. She turned away, blinking fast. "I didn't do this to impress you," he added gently. "I did it because you made me remember who I was." She looked back at him. "Then let's build it together." That night, they planted the first tree sapling beside the oak. Not because it was needed, but because it was time for something new to grow. Together. It began with a photo. A grainy image, taken through a car window streaked with rain, showing Mira and Elijah sitting beneath the oak tree. She was curled beside him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. His coat was draped over her like a quiet promise. It was intimate. Gentle. Sacred. It was never meant for the world. But someone had taken it, and by morning, it had exploded across social media. The caption? CEO Elijah Brooks spotted with mystery girl in derelict city lot. Cinderella or scandal? The firestorm that followed moved fast, faster than either of them could have prepared for. Articles popped up like weeds. From foster care to billionaire's heart? Rideshare romance, the college girl who stole a muggle's attention. Does she really love him? Or his bank account? And then the worst of it, they found her. The press and the trolls. Her real name. Her foster history. The shelters she'd passed through. The scholarships she'd fought to earn. Even the part-time jobs that barely kept her afloat. Within 48 hours, Mira's world was no longer her own. She didn't sleep that night. Every ping from her phone was another headline, another message, another attempt to reduce her into something shallow. A gold digger. A scam. A symbol of pity. Even the voices that defended her did so with tones soaked in condescension. Poor girl. She's trying her best. Don't blame her. She probably doesn't know any better. Mira sat on her apartment floor, her back against the fridge, knees drawn to her chest. She didn't cry. She just folded inward. The next morning, someone followed her on campus, snapping photos from a distance. 2 professors gently suggested she take a leave of absence. A group of classmates stared as she passed in the hallway, whispering like she couldn't hear them. It wasn't just attention. It was humiliation. Elijah tried everything. He shut down interviews. Called in PR teams. Tried to take control of the narrative. But the damage had already rooted itself deep. When he arrived at Mira's apartment building that evening, she didn't answer at first. He stood outside the door in the hallway for several minutes, the city sounds muffled behind him. "Mira," he said gently. Open the door. A pause. Then, a small voice, "You shouldn't be here. I'm not leaving." She opened it just a crack, enough for him to see her face, pale and puffy from exhaustion, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "I can't be the reason you lose everything," she whispered. "You're not the reason I'd lose anything," Elijah replied. "You're the reason I found what matters." But still, she didn't believe it. Not completely. Not yet. So the next morning, Elijah stood in front of a crowd of cameras, alone. No suit. No teleprompter. Just him in a navy sweater and a microphone. The reporters shouted over each other. "Who is she? Do you plan to marry her? Is this a publicity stunt? What about her past?" He raised his hand. And silence fell. "Mira Lane," he said clearly, "is not a footnote in my story. She is the girl I lost when we were children. And the woman I will never walk away from again." He didn't talk about the money, the gossip, the noise. He talked about her voice, her courage, the way she waited by a tree for a boy who never came. "She has never asked me for anything," he said quietly. "Not money. Not favors. Not even forgiveness. She just showed me what it looks like to love without expectation." There was a moment of stillness after he spoke. Then, slow but steady, applause. Real. Tentative. But growing. He stepped down from the podium and walked out without taking another question. Back in her apartment, Mira watched the press conference on mute. She didn't hear the words. But she saw his face. And that was enough. The backlash began to fade, not because the world forgot, but because it was replaced by something else entirely. Letters. Hundreds of them. From foster youth. From single mothers. From social workers, teachers, former orphans, and people who had lived invisible lives and now felt, somehow, seen. One letter read. "I thought I had to hide my past to be loved. Thank you for showing me I don't." Another said. "You made us visible. I cried watching you stand there, strong. I believe in hope again." Mira read every one. She hung them on her walls, taped some to her fridge, carried one in her pocket like armor. And when she finally opened the door again, to the world, and to Elijah, she did so with a deeper kind of strength. They returned to Harper's Lane together. To the tree. To home bloom. To the lavender that now bloomed faintly in clusters, even in the cold. It wasn't perfect. They still got looks. Still heard whispers. But they held hands anyway. One morning, Elijah knelt beside the oak. Not with a ring. Not yet. But with a small wooden sign. He staked it into the soil with his own hands. Etched on the front, in hand-burned letters. "Some roots grow in silence, but they hold up the strongest trees." Mira traced the words gently. "Do you think they'll forget?" she asked, voice soft. "No," Elijah said. "But they'll see the truth now. And that's all we ever needed." Spring arrived with shy sunlight and petals blooming through cracks in forgotten sidewalks. The lot on Harper's Lane, once a shadow of a place, now buzzed with quiet activity. Where broken bricks once lay scattered, a garden had grown, deliberate and wild. Lavender in orderly rows. Daisies spilling over the borders. Herbs in handmade boxes labeled in looping childlike script, hope, kindness, courage. The oak tree stood at the center, unchanged but not alone. Its branches still reached toward the sky, but now its roots shared the earth with dozens of new saplings, planted by hands that had once known abandonment but had chosen to sow belonging instead. They called it the Home Bloom Garden. But to those who stepped inside, it felt like something even more rare. A second beginning. On a golden afternoon in May, Mira stood beneath the oak in a soft linen dress the color of sunrise. Her hair was loose, catching the breeze. In her hands, she held a small bouquet, not of roses or orchids, but of hand-folded letters, the old ones she once hid under that very tree, now shaped into delicate paper flowers. Each one whispered history. Each one bloomed with healing. Elijah stood a few feet away, his white shirt sleeves rolled up, his vest pocket filled with lavender sprigs. He wasn't the polished CEO today. No camera-ready suit. No rehearsed smile. Just him, barefoot in the grass, heart wide open. Eric, a boy from Mira's outreach program, 8 years old, with oversized glasses and a toothy grin, stood between them holding a tiny velvet box. He was the ring bearer. But more than that, he was the future they had both once longed for. Mira had met Eric months ago during a shelter visit. He reminded her of Elijah, the same stubborn sparkle in his eyes. One day, when he asked her quietly, "Do grown-ups always leave?" she'd hugged him and said, "Not the ones who mean it." 2 weeks later, Elijah had said, "Let's bring him home." The ceremony wasn't grand. There were no chandeliers or symphonies. No velvet aisles or 10-tier cakes. The chairs were mismatched, donated by neighbors and shelters. The music came from a borrowed keyboard and a single violin. The aisle was a path of petals, laid down by children who had never walked one before. The guests were teachers, social workers, foster parents, old friends, and strangers turned family, people who knew what it meant to lose, and what it took to heal. When Mira walked down that aisle, she didn't tremble. She smiled. Because she wasn't walking toward a perfect future. She was walking toward the man who had seen her in her rain-drenched pain, her invisible hope, and had stayed. Their vows were quiet, unrehearsed, whispered beneath the leaves. "I don't need a castle," Mira said. "I just need a place where you wait with warm tea and open arms." "I don't need a perfect plan," Elijah replied. "Just a life where you wake up beside me, even when the world is loud." When the ring slid into place, there were no fireworks. But there was something greater. A silence filled with promise. That night, the celebration lingered long after the sun dipped below the rooftops. Guests sipped apple cider and laughed over cookies baked by Mira and the girls from the youth center. The garden flickered with soft string lights. Children played tag under the tree that had once stood alone, their footsteps a new kind of music. Then, just as twilight painted the sky in indigo and rose, Elijah stepped forward with a final announcement. He held a worn piece of paper, the same page Mira had once found in the orphanage office, with his name and the words "Come back soon, Will." He unfolded it, looked out over the crowd, and spoke. "When I left this city as a child, I didn't know what I was leaving behind. I thought life moved in one direction. Forward. Away. But it doesn't." He glanced toward Mira. "Sometimes, the most important journeys are the ones that bring you back." Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple plaque, engraved with 6 words. "The Home Bloom Foundation, grow where you were planted." Cheers rose. Hands clapped. Tears fell. And just like that, the garden had a mission bigger than its soil. The foundation offered full scholarships for youth from foster backgrounds. Mentorship programs. Microgrants for small businesses started by survivors of the system. Mental health services with no red tape. And every year, on the anniversary of that first garden planting, there would be a gathering, not a gala, not a fundraiser, but a reunion. A reminder. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. You are still growing. Months passed. Mira kept her job at the community center, teaching art and storytelling. Elijah took a step back from day-to-day operations, focusing instead on the foundation and the garden. Every Saturday morning, the 3 of them, Mira, Elijah, and Eric, visited the garden. Eric always brought his science notebook, jotting down which flowers bloomed fastest, what colors bees liked best, and how long it would take for a lavender field to fill the entire lot. "I want to build a treehouse in the oak one day," he told them once. Elijah chuckled. "Then we'll need some strong ropes and stronger dreams." On a quiet evening just before autumn, Mira stood beneath the oak alone. The sky was golden. The leaves rustled like soft applause. She reached into her pocket and pulled out one of the first letters she had ever written, faded, torn, but still whole. She whispered it aloud. "Dearie. I miss you. But I still sing. Come back soon." She folded it, pressed it to the trunk, and smiled. Because now, he had. As twilight fell and the city lights flickered on, Mira turned toward the path leading home, toward the house she shared with Elijah and Eric. A home they had built not from bricks, but from second chances. And as she walked, the breeze carried a faint tune, her voice humming the old lullaby. "You are my sunshine." Only this time, she wasn't singing it for someone far away. She was singing it beside the man who had become her sunlight. And with every step she took, flowers bloomed in the wake of what they had healed.